Hi, this tutorial is an introduction to using the Terrain Toolkit for the Unity editor. The Terrain Toolkit is an integrated solution for generating procedural terrain directly within the Unity editor. What I'm going to cover in this tutorial is the basic steps in creating your first terrain object. Now to start this, I'm going to go up to the Terrain menu and click Create Terrain, so you can see that a new terrain object has been created in my scene view. I'm then going to go up to the Component menu and click Terrain Toolkit to add the Terrain Toolkit component to that terrain object. Now you can see that that component with all its UI has appeared in my inspector panel. Across the top you can see that there are three tabs: Create, Erode, and Texture. These are the three steps that we're going to cover in this tutorial. Firstly, I'm going to use a Voronoi filter to create some basic landmarks for my terrain. Here I'm going to use a preset. I'm going to go into Jagged Mountains, and I'm going to tweak some of these settings. Now you'll find that in the documentation for the Terrain Toolkit, what all these settings do is covered in detail. So now that I've got the settings I want, I'm just going to click Generate Voronoi Features. It'll take a moment to generate the height map. So you can see that that's added a number of peaks to my terrain object. It's not looking very realistic yet, but these peaks will form the foundation of my terrain. One advantage of using a Voronoi pattern is that I'm going to get distinct paths between these peaks, so the terrain is going to be quite navigable from a character's point of view. Next I'm going to go into the Perlin Noise tab, and I'm going to add a preset here too. I'm going to go to Rocky Mountains. As I don't want to overwrite what I've already done with the Voronoi filter, I'm going to drag the blend value down to about 60% and click Generate Perlin Terrain. So you can see that some of the peaks from my Voronoi terrain are still there, but I'm getting something that's starting to look much more realistic. I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm going to move on to the Erosion tab. Firstly, I'm going to go into the Hydraulic Erosion tab, and just in the fast erosion type, I'm going to use a preset called Rainswept Earth, and that'll add some hydraulic erosion to my terrain objects. I'm happy with all those settings, so I'm just going to click Apply Hydraulic Erosion. Now you can see that that's already eroded the terrain object quite a bit. You'll find that hydraulic erosion will tend to flatten flat areas of the terrain and steepen steeper areas of the terrain. What this will result in is a bit of a terracing effect that you can see here. So to smooth that out, I'm going to go into the Thermal Erosion tab, and again I'm going to use a preset. But instead of running 25 erosions, I'm just going to run about 15 here. And I'm going to click Apply Thermal Erosion. Now you can see that my terrain object's a bit more smoothed out. Now I might add some more erosion to this terrain object, but first I'm going to go into the texture panel to see what my terrain is really going to look like with some textures added to it. Now you can see in this panel no textures have been added to the terrain object yet, so I'm going to click Add Texture 4 times so I can add 4 textures to my terrain object. You can see that these 4 textures are called Cliff Texture, which gets applied to steep areas of the terrain, and then the rest are just numbered 1, 2, and 3. Texture 1 will get applied to the lowest areas of the terrain, Texture 3 will get applied to the highest areas of the terrain, and Texture 2 will be applied in between. You can add up to 6 textures in here, but I'm just going to use 4 for now. I've already downloaded the terrain assets. You can get these from the resources section of the Unity website. I'm going to go into textures. I'm going to use Cliff Layered Rock for my cliff texture, a sand texture for my lower altitude areas, grass for the middle one, and I'm going to use snow for the higher altitude parts. Now I'm going to go through and change some of these settings. On the texture slope, you can see that there are 2 stops that you can drag around here. I'm going to set these to about 20 and 70. Now what this means is that any part of the terrain that is steeper than 70 degrees is going to have the cliff texture applied in full, and that'll fade out down to where the incremental gradient is 20 degrees. And for texture height, these work a little bit like a gradient editor in most graphic applications such as Photoshop. So here, texture 1 will get applied up until this point, texture 2 will be applied from here to here, and texture 1 and 2 will blend from here to here, and so on. So the highest part of my terrain will get applied to this texture, which is the snow. So when I'm happy with those, I'm just going to click Apply Procedural Texture. You can see that my terrain objects has been textured. Now, I'm not seeing any snow there, so I'm going to go back into my Create tab and go to Normalize and normalize my terrain object. And you can see that that's increased some of the altitude because it spread the heights out from the lowest value up to the highest value. Now I'm just going to reapply my procedural texture, and you can see that I've got textures ranging from the grass, the sand, all the way up to the rock and snow at higher altitudes. Now this is a bit steeper than I really want it to be, so I'm actually going to go back into the Normalize tab and normalize it back down to 60%, so I get something that feels a little bit more realistic. Maybe make that a little bit higher. Now I'm pretty happy with this, but I'm going to add a little bit more erosion just to smooth out my terrain a little bit more. I'm going to go into the Erosion tab, into Hydraulic Erosion. I'm going to use full hydraulic erosion this time, and I'm going to use a preset, Low Rainfall Soft Earth. I'm just going to run that. Now that's actually smoothed out my terrain object a bit more than I really want. It's starting to look a little bit too soft. I can go to Edit and Undo Terrain Erosion. All of the features of the Terrain Toolkit, with the exception of texturing, are fully undoable, which means that if you add a filter that you're not happy with the results of, you can always go back. Instead, I'm going to go to Low Rainfall Hard Rock, which will have a little bit less solubility and won't move the material around quite as much, and click Apply Hydraulic Erosion once more. And I'm pretty happy with that. Now that I've added that erosion, I'm going to go back into the texture panel, just tweak a few of these settings, and I'm going to hit Apply Procedural Texture again. So there, now I've created my terrain object, and I'm pretty happy with that. You can see that due to the erosion and some of the filters that I've used, there are areas of this terrain object which are quite low in gradient, and it's actually quite a playable terrain object, but interesting enough that it's going to create some interesting gameplay. So thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoy creating your own terrains with the Terrain Toolkit.